Trackhouse Racing loses their appeal of NASCAR in regards to the race manipulation from Martinsville, and Cory Heim will return to TRICON Garage in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Williams' 2024 Startron scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix. Scheme's really cool in my opinion. It's for a really great cause. It looks really solid, and it's going to be really good to see out on the racetrack this weekend at Phoenix. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2024 Silk scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix. This could be the final time we see a Kroger scheme for the team. This does look pretty good. It does have some good look to it. One of the better JTG schemes we've seen so far this year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeffrey Earnhardt's 2024 Synergy Modular scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix. We've seen Synergy Modular sponsor Jeffrey Earnhardt this year, but this is the first time with this look. I think it looks pretty good, and I think Sam Hunt Racing did a pretty good job on this paint scheme overall. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeff Burton's 2024 My Luxido scheme that we'll see this weekend in his return to the Cup Series at Phoenix. This scheme looks really great in my opinion. I think it does have some good colors. I do like the black. I do like the colors of it overall. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Phoenix. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Busch's 2024 Three Chiefs scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix. The classic Three Chiefs scheme is back. The last time Kyle Busch won a Cup race was with Three Chiefs as a sponsor. It'd be really cool to see him get it done with the scheme. I think it does look really solid, and it's great to see they're bringing this paint scheme back for the final race of 2024. Unknown if the scheme will be back in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Big Machine Vodka. As it was announced earlier today, the Big Machine Vodka has signed a multi-year extension with Indianapolis Motor Speedway to continue being one of the entitlement brands of the racetrack. Big Machine has been a big sponsor for the Brickyard Runners since around 2017 or 2018, and they've been working with them for quite some time. This is a really huge deal. Big Machine continues to move in big things. Obviously, they work with the National IndyCar race, and now they're continuing working with NASCAR at Indianapolis Motor Speedway and probably IndyCar as well for their events going forward. I think it's a really huge deal nonetheless, and glad to see they'll continue working with Indianapolis Motor Speedway going into the future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Phoenix purse money. So every time you have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series race, Bob Proctor puts out the purse money for that event. For the Cup race, it's $11,700,064. For the Xfinity race, it's $1,772,722. And for the truck race, it's $822,570. If I'm not mistaken, outside of the Daytona 500 this year, I believe that is the biggest purse for the Cup Series. Obviously, with the charter teams, some of the unchartered teams, that money's going up. For Xfinity, it's not that bad. It's not great, but not too bad. For the Truck Series, there definitely needs to be a little bit more money that comes in there. I think that's something they got to work on for sure. Hopefully, with the Xfinity Series and Truck Series going into next year's deal, we could see an increase in that. We'll have to wait and see what happens, though, but I do think that there's definitely some decent numbers here for sure, but it's not the best I've seen so far, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carvana. As it was reported by Adam Stern earlier today, that Carvana has crafted a new marketing campaign with Jimmy Johnson to promote its same-day vehicle delivery service. Carvana, for those who don't know, has been working with Jimmy Johnson and, of course, Legacy Motor Club over the course of the last couple of years, and also, of course, I believe sponsored him in his IndyCar days starting in 2021 when Jimmy Johnson transitioned away from NASCAR to work in IndyCar. And now Carvana is doing more commercials. This is what we need to see more. We need to see some of these big-name drivers in NASCAR, not just for guys that are retired from full-time racing. We want to see guys outside of that bubble come in and help grow the sport. And having a company like Carvana that's trying to grow their brand when it comes to delivering vehicles, that's something that we want to see. I hope more of these sponsors can do this. We see this Bernards of Brandon Jones and Dale Jr. We haven't really seen HendrickCars.com do something like this with Kyle Larson, which I think is something that should happen. We've seen Chase Elliott do back in the day, about 10 years ago, do some Napa commercials. I'd like to see this continue going forward where we do see some more of these brands come into play. I think pretty awesome it could happen, but it's cool to see nonetheless that Carvana is doing an ad for it, so I think it's really awesome in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about AI. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday, that NASCAR is using generative AI to produce its in-race updates on its track app. And in addition to that, editorial and social teams gave input in regards to updates, among other things, in the sport as well. You think about the comments from NASCAR earlier this week where Mike Ford and Denny Hamlin kind of talked about this too, where he basically called NASCAR fans bots that were complaining. And then you see all this AI stuff that comes out about NASCAR working with AI. AI, of course, is very controversial. People aren't a big fan of artificial intelligence. They're not the biggest fan of it overall. And I think that NASCAR getting involved is kind of ironic after everything that's been going on this week, especially with fans being frustrated with the platform, which, trust me, we're going to talk about it here in just a little bit. But I don't think everything's clearly on AI, but there's a lot of controversy around it, and it's definitely concerning to see how many people are starting to get used to it, how quickly it's growing overall, and not just in the US, but across the world as well. To me, it's just funny, especially after some of the comments made by people in the industry, that we see basically them using AI. It's kind of funny and kind of wild, and I think it's kind of crazy to see that they're using a lot of AI. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RickW Racing. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley yesterday from TobyChristie.com, that RickW Racing will be swapping crew chiefs for the final race at Phoenix. So Chris Lawson, who's been the crew chief for Cory for the last couple of races, he will be the crew chief for Kaz Grala for the final event. And Billy Plorty, who's been the crew chief for the 15 RickW Racing car, will move over to work with Cory for the final race of the year. This is definitely very interesting timing. I kind of talked about this on the channel a couple weeks ago, but there's a lot of rumors that Chris Lawson will not be back with this team next year, as he's likely going to be headed over to Front Row Motorsports in 2025, maybe working with one of the teams going into next year. But I think if they were going to make this move, they probably should have made it before the final race of the year, especially if they want to grow their team and make their team better, which we've seen RickW Racing show improvement throughout the year. Justin Haley, who drove for the team only about 5 or 6 weeks ago, he's done a really good job of RickW Racing, though now, of course, he's working with Spire. To me, it's a very interesting timing they're making this move. I think that RickW has shown some improvement throughout the year, but they've got to continue to try to work to make themselves better. So we'll see what happens in regards to next year. I'd have to imagine if Cory sticks around, that Billy Plorty could be the crew chief. There's rumors that RickW could sell one of their full-time charters, maybe because RFK is likely going to expand to become a 3-car team full-time next year. That Sage Shifty car will become a full-time car. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but I do think overall there's some big stuff coming down the road that'll be very interesting to watch in regards to RickW Racing. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Martin Truex Jr. Now, earlier this evening, NASCAR's Twitter page and many of the pages that NASCAR runs put out a really awesome video thanking Martin Truex Jr. for racing in his full-time career. Obviously, this weekend at Phoenix will be the final full-time NASCAR Cup Series race for Martin Truex Jr. He will likely run the Daytona 500 with 23-11. That is depending on if the injunction is granted. We do think they're likely going to run 4 cars at least part-time next year. Maybe see someone like a Carlos Gerber or something like that happen. But as for Martin Truex Jr., going and talking about his career, Martin has been one of the basically driver who had a late race resurgence and light career resurgence. Think about after the first 8 or 9 full years of his career, he only won 2 races. Then 2015 comes around, he wins that race at Furniture Road Pocono, and it becomes a championship contender. And then in 2017, he goes on and wins the championship for Furniture Road Racing. That's the only non-Joe Gibbs, Hendrick, or Penske team that has gone on to win a championship. And Martin Truex Jr. has been one of the most iconic drivers over the course of the last 10 years. It's going to be sad to see him not running full-time next year, but I do think that he has had an amazing career in the sport, and he, in my opinion, is a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I really hope people that watch NASCAR can respect him for everything that he has been able to accomplish and everything he's done in the sport. And I'm glad to see that he gets to be heading off on a really high note. Hope he can run really well. He's going to be running a really awesome paint scheme this weekend. I really hope he can run superb and run really well, because I think a lot of fans would be very happy to see him run great. Hope he can do a really good job with Joe Gibbs Racing and run his final full-time race really well this weekend at Phoenix, end their career on a really high note. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stewart-Haas Racing. Now, just like Trix Jr., this is the final time we will see Stewart-Haas Racing on the racetrack. Remember, at the end of this weekend, Stewart-Haas Racing will be closing their doors, and everyone, like Rodney shows, everyone that's been part of this team basically had to get out of the shop earlier this week. Now, they released a really touching video and kind of an emotional video for people that have been around SHR. You think about how much success Stewart-Haas Racing has had in this sport and everything they've been able to accomplish. 2 NASCAR Cup Series championships in 2011 and 2014. They, of course, won the Southern 500 earlier this year with Chase Briscoe, and they made the playoffs with Chase Briscoe this year. You think about success of drivers like Eric Almirola and Kurt Busch and Kevin Harvick and Clint Bowyer and Chase Briscoe getting a couple wins, and other drivers like Josh Berry coming in. They could have gotten Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson at some point, though they didn't end up picking up those drivers. But I think it's going to be sad to see Stewart-Haas Racing go away. They have a chance to win the NASCAR Xfinity Series Championship with Cole Custer, which I do believe that Cole Custer's got a really good chance and opportunity to get it done because Cole's been really strong at Phoenix in the past, and of course he did win the championship last year. So we'll see how they end up doing. I would love to see them win also, almost like Trix Jr. I'd like to see them win. It'd be really cool to see them have a chance and opportunity. We'll see if they can run really well. They were pretty fast at Martinsville. We'll see if they can bring the pace and speed and can contend this weekend at Phoenix Racing. It'd be cool to see him get it done. Maybe Josh Berry get that 4-car to victory lane. That'd be pretty cool if it did end up happening. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about some Phoenix roster updates for this weekend. Now, obviously, we talked about the fact that the 23 team, the 3 team, and of course the number 1 team, which we'll get to the Trackhouse stuff in just a little bit. There are some roster updates in regards to crew chiefs and, of course, spotter moves. So, we already know the 2311 denied their appeal and they are no longer appealing the penalties. So, Eric Phillips, who's been working as one of the higher-ups at 2311 Racing, will be the crew chief for this weekend at Phoenix in replacement for Booty Barker, who, of course, got suspended for this week. So, Booty Barker will not be the crew chief in his final time in this field. TJ Bell will be the spotter for Bubba Wallace as well. Freddie Kraft, of course, been the spotter for Bubba Wallace over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, it seems like at this point. He will not be spotting. TJ Bell, I believe, will also be the spotter for Dawson Sutton and Blaine Perkins because Dawson has been having Freddie Kraft as a spotter. I expect that he will be the spotter for that event as well. Brenton Wentz, I believe, is going to be the spotter for Austin Dillon or Ross Chastain, if I'm not mistaken. Eric Holmes actually will be the spotter, I believe, in substitution for Brandon McReynolds. And Darian Grubb will be the crew chief for Ross Chastain this weekend, which Darian Grubb, the second to last time he crew chief was, of course, with Shane Van Gisbergen. And guess what SVG did? He ended up winning at the Chicago Street Course. I think that you're going to have some very interesting chances to see Ross Chastain win. Ross Chastain is the defending winner of the last race at Phoenix in the championship event, I should say. So I think that they could have the pace and speed. And Ross has been generally really good at Phoenix historically. Ran really well here in the spring, one of the few Chevrolets that kept up most of the event. I do believe that they are going to be very, very strong and super, super competitive. Eric Phillips has been a long-time crew chief in the sport. He crew chief for Kyle Busch basically when KBM started. He crew chief for Joe Nemechek back in the early 2000s and worked, I believe, with John Hunter Nemechek in 2021 in the Craftsman Truck Series and nearly won the championship that year. You're going to have a really strong pairings for this weekend at Phoenix, and as much as I think they wanted to keep everybody kind of normal for this event, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out this weekend. Will they end up performing? Will it distract 2311? Will it distract other people? That's going to be something that we're going to have to kind of watch and wait and see. But nonetheless, I think it's very interesting to see the moves they're making, and I think that it'll be kind of fun to watch to see what happens this weekend as these updates have come into play, and I think they're pretty interesting moves in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR playoff viewership. As it was reported by NASCAR and NBC's PR account that the average of the NASCAR playoff viewership so far for the first 9 races has been at 2.5 million viewers. That is up 6% from 2023. But unfortunately, it is down from 2022 by about 4 or 5%. The positive here is that at least the viewership is up a little bit for NASCAR playoffs. Which is kind of crazy to see because usually, especially over the last 5 or 6 years really, since we've gotten this format coming into play, we have seen the ratings generally go down. but to see the ratings going up, I think is really, really huge. Though the sport still has a long way to go to get back to where it was about 10 or 15 years ago, which we're probably never going to get back to those levels we were at 10 or 15 years ago. But I think at the same time, the better that NASCAR can do and continue growing the sport, the better it can be. And I think it's really huge to see. Now, will the championship race be down? That's going to be the question, because the championship race was flat from 2022 last year. I would have to imagine, because there's a lot of people that were frustrated with the end of the NASCAR Cup Series race at Martinsville, not basically the racing itself, but of course the finish, and of course being Phoenix, which isn't the best track for racing, no disrespect. The racing just has not been that great at the track. I really hope they can have a fantastic race as a whole, but I'm not expecting the race to be really, really good this weekend at Phoenix. So kind of have to kind of wait and see what happens. Also, you're not going to have guys like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott competing for the championship, two of the most popular drivers in the sport. You don't have Christopher Bell in there. You don't have guys like Ross Chastain, Bubba Wallace, Kyle Busch, you name it. Maybe even SVG as well competing for the championship. So obviously there's going to be some people that are going to tune out regardless, but to see at least that the viewership is up a little bit, I think it's a really huge deal, and glad to see that at least the viewership is up a little bit, because I do think it's a good step in the right direction. Hopefully we continue seeing viewership go up going forward, so I think it'd be really huge that for the viewership to go up and get the sport back in a better position, though there are some people that are very concerned and very worried about the future just a little bit. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ty Majeski. Now, earlier this week, it was announced that Ty Majeski, along with the big race manipulation penalty, it was confirmed that Ty Majeski had received a $12,500 fine, basically for not showing up at Championship Media Day. You want to know why he did not show up to Championship 4 Media Day on Tuesday? Well, the big thing that was going on was the election. The election was happening, and Ty Majeski even spoke to the media today in regards to this and said that he is not someone that likes to do early mail-in votes. He says he likes to do in-person voting. Now, I did a little bit of digging in regards to Wisconsin, where he is from. And basically, they are required, I believe, in that state where you're supposed to give a couple hours in order to allow them to vote. So if he is appealing like he should be, and I personally think he should be appealing, because I think this is a really, really stupid decision that NASCAR did right here. I understand the championship is important, but when it comes to voting, I think that's definitely more important than basically racing for a championship that really hasn't mattered in a very, very long time. At least he didn't get a points penalty. That's a positive here, which points really don't matter at this point anyways. But I do think had he gotten a points penalty, man, there would have been a lot of frustrated people like myself, because that would have been really stupid for NASCAR to do. But I do think he's got a good chance. If what I did see today and what is true about Wisconsin, a lot of other states, they basically in-person voting is a way to go anyways, but I do think personally that they did make the wrong decision to fine him. I don't think he should be fining somebody for doing their civil duty in this country. I think that's really stupid in my opinion that NASCAR did that. I have to think Ty Majeski's got a really good chance to win. I do know, like I said, early in the voting, that's kind of stuff, but I do think that he has a great chance and opportunity to win, because there is certain things. I'd have to imagine that they're going to see that appeal come into play for next week, and we'll see if that happens. But I'm not surprised to see they're appealing the fine. Maybe we could see 4 paid up or Thorsport paid up. I don't know at this point. But at this point, we do know Ty Majeski is going to appeal the fine, which is not shocking or surprising, to be honest. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, we didn't talk about this much on the channel earlier this week, but Denny Hamlin was, of course, on Actions Detrimental. And Denny Hamlin has some very interesting comments in regards to the NASCAR playoff system. He basically says that if Joey Logano wins the NASCAR Cup Series title this upcoming weekend at Phoenix, which of course Joey Logano will be competing for a title, he says that social media is going to be a wrap this weekend. He also commented on the fact that Kyle Larson had 6 wins this year and is currently leading the regular season standings if the playoffs weren't a thing. And yet Kyle Larson doesn't have a chance to win the championship. Now, Denny Hamlin is absolutely on point, at least in most areas. I do think that the playoffs, in certain instances, do promote basically performing at a really strong level. And Kyle Larson did make some mistakes. There's no denying that. However, the fact that Joey Logano, who is 15th in the points right now, or 14th in the regular season standings right now, and has a 17.6 average finish, and only has 6 top 5s and 12 top 10s. The fact that he can compete for a championship this week, and the fact that a guy like Kyle Larson or even Christopher Bell, the only 2 drivers who've led 1,000 laps so far this year, the two guys who have the most stage wins this year cannot compete for a championship, it is definitely not a good look for the sport. And I do agree with Denny Hamlin. There are going to be a lot of people that are going to be very, very frustrated. I really hope that, especially with all the race manipulation stuff that ended up happening, I really hope NASCAR can get rid of the system or change up the system. For me, I think that we need to get rid of the win and you're in. I think the win and you're in is one of the biggest catalysts to a lot of the major problems that this system has. A lot of the dumb things like the race manipulation, all that stuff, or basically stuff that Austin Dillon did at Richmond. A lot of that was caused by this broken playoff system. And I think there's a lot of people that are not interested in caring about the championship because we've seen it too many times before. Kevin Harvick 4 years ago, for example, the best guy all year, won 9 races, became almost the first person since Jimmy Johnson in 2007 to get it done. And then Kyle Larson, of course, the next year in 2021 ended up doing that. But still, Kevin Harvick didn't win the championship. He probably should have been in the Final Four if we're going to be honest. If we're going to have this system, I think the best drivers should get in. I do think we need to go back to the chase format, or the original chase format, where the top 10 or 12, but make winning more important. Mix the system a little bit to where winning matters, but you're not locked into the championship. Because in my personal opinion, there really shouldn't be a reason that we should be seeing certain drivers get into championships. I think there's got to be changes to the system, and I'm really hoping in the not-so-distant future we could see a change to make the sport better, because I think it's all we want is sport to be in a better place, and I think that this championship is really affecting that. Hopefully that can change very, very soon. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Andres Perez. Now, earlier today, Bob Pockrass did report that Andres Perez will be behind the wheel of the 04 truck for Roper Racing. We already kind of talked about that on the channel earlier this week. Originally, Marco Andretti was going to be the driver of 04. He is focusing on running the ARCA West race later today for Venturini Motorsports. But Bob noticed something very, very interesting in here. He noted that Andres Perez may be getting a little bit of experience behind the wheel of this truck to get prepared for 2025. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there have been some rumors and speculation that Andres Perez could be moving up to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2025. We kind of talked about it yesterday or a couple days ago as well, that basically it sounds like the Spire is going to be having a pretty big shakeup to their lineup going into 2025. We do think Raj Kurf more than likely will be back with Spire Motorsports. He might be getting Kevin Boney Mannion as a crew chief. There have been rumors about a potential possibility that Rev Racing isn't even back in the Truck Series next year, but if they do show up once again, I think you see him behind the wheel of the number 2 truck next year. Now, Andres, I think, is a talented driver. The thing for me, though, is that Andres has still not won an ARCA race. Basically, this year, he had 2 cars winning. The 18 car and the 28 car. Connor Zilic and Williams Walsh dominated this year, and he did get a couple occasional wins from Venturini Motorsports throughout the year for Gustine and Gio Ruggiero, or actually Jake Finch, But really, no one just came in and dominated outside the 18 and 28 car, and he had the ARCA champion not winning a single race. Now, he of course did really well in his Truck Series debut, ran top 10 a lot of the event, and showed some good speed at Gateway, but he just isn't someone that I expect that's going to set the world on fire. And is he going to outperform Nick Sanchez if he goes to Rev? I don't think so. I don't think that he's going to go in there and outperform him. I think he's going to be a playoff contender, but I think Nick Sanchez objectively is a better driver than Andres Perez. I know he's won some NASCAR Mexico races, so that definitely helps his case a little bit, but I do not expect him to set the world on fire if he truly ends up with the team next year. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to the rest of the silly season there. I do think Chase Purdy will not be back with this program either. He kind of confirmed that earlier this week, so we'll have to wait and see. But I do think there's some things that are going to happen here, and I do think Andres has a really good chance and a strong possibility of being part of this program in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, earlier this week, Speed Cafe had reported that Shane Van Gisbergen is begging his wife, or I think fiance or his girlfriend, Jess Dane, who's doing a lot of work for Corvette now, I believe in GT3. He's been asking her about trying to get to race in the Rolex 24 in 2025. And he did reveal in this article that he's currently working on trying to run the Rolex 24 once again. Now, SVG has ran the Rolex 24 in the past. I believe in the year that Kyle Busch drove in it, which is either 2018 or 2019. I believe that SVG competed for the WeatherTech team that year in the Porsche class, basically in GT3. or in GTLM or GTLD Pro or whatever class he ended up running. But he has driven in the Rolex 24 in the past, and I think he did a really good job. And I think a lot of people would expect he'd probably be part of GT, considering his experience with the next-gen car at this point, and of course the Xfinity Series car. But I'm going to disagree. I want to see him in a GTP car going for the overall win. We know that Trackhouse Racing is interested in running the Rolex 24, and they're having talks and conversations about running the Rolex 24. I think getting them in a GTP car, which there are some good GTP cars out there, maybe like Action Express, maybe talking to them to fund a Action Express car, and have a NASCAR-based car with Connor Zillage, Shane Van Gisbergen, and Kyle Larson, and maybe get someone like a Chase Elliott or Kyle Busch perhaps. If you had those 4 drivers in that team, you would have one of the most all-around talented organizations out there. Connor Zillage is the best NASCAR prospect you have, and he's going to be someone that's going to dominate on the road courses and be really strong next year. You've got Shane, one of the best road course racers in the field and one of the most talented drivers in the world. Then you've got Kyle Larson, arguably one of the most talented drivers in the world and one of the best drivers in the world. And someone that I think who's won the Rolex 24 overall, by the way, back in 2015, and won with Chip Ganassi. So I think Kyle Larson would be great. And then you have Kyle Busch. I think Kyle Busch going for the overall win would be absolutely amazing. All 4 of these drivers have driven the Rolex 24. 2 of them have won classes, Connor Zillage, Kyle Larson. If you had all 4 of these drivers together, it would be epic. So we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens in regards to that if it does end up coming true. But I do think there's a really great chance this does end up happening. In fact, it's being reported. I hope it does end up happening. We'll see what ends up happening. I hope we do get to see him run the Rolex 24 in 2025. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Matt McCall. As it was announced earlier this morning that Matt McCall will not be returning to RFK Racing in 2025 and will not crew chief for Brad Keselowski in 2025. This has been rumored over the course of the last couple days. There's been rumored speculation that Matt McCall was not going to be back with RFK Racing next year. Matt McCall has been the crew chief since 2022 after leaving Chip Ganassi Racing, working with Kurt Busch for the last couple years in the One organization. He moved over to work with Brad Keselowski in RFK Racing starting in 2022. And both these guys actually gelled very well. Brad Keselowski really had a good end to 2022 and showed some improvement in 2023, making the playoffs and getting to the round of 12. And then in 2024, he got Brad Keselowski his first Cup Series win since Talladega in 2021. People, though, have criticized Matt McCall for some bad strategy calls over the years, and many people feel like there needs to be a new change for Brad Keselowski, even though I do think that Matt McCall's had a solid job and done a solid job, and he had a really good run as a crew chief for this past weekend at Martinsville. He put together a strong performance for Brad, and they showed up with a really, really good car. Now, the big question is, where does Matt McCall go and who's going to be replacement for him in 2025? Starting off where Matt McCall is going, some are speculating he's going to be headed over to Spire Motorsports next year, maybe working with Andres Perez-Laura, maybe working with Kaz Grala in the Truck Series. That could certainly be a possibility. Maybe he'll be the crew chief for Carson Hosar. We don't know at this point if Luke Lambert's coming back. We know that Travis Peterson is going to be the crew chief next year for Michael McDowell, and we know that Ryan Chose will be the crew chief for the 7. But obviously, if he's truly going to Spire, it makes a lot of sense. Spire is hiring a lot of people and building their program up, and especially with the rumors going around that Hendrick Motorsports is going to be giving them a lot more support and probably them becoming a Tier 1 team next year. Going over there is a no-brainer, especially with that Gamebridge money over there. It is really going to help them out. And the other question now we have to ask is who's going to be the crew chief for Brad? It sounds very likely it's going to be Jeremy Bullins. Everyone is saying it's Jeremy Bullins. He's worked with Brad in the past. He worked with Brad from 2020 through 2021. And in 2020, when they worked together, Brad got 4 wins and made the championship 4. So I think Jeremy Bullins is a good crew chief. I know he kind of struggled the last couple years with Austin Cindric and Harrison Burton, but I don't think he's the problem. Harrison was, of course, a driver who was way over in his head, should not have been in Cup as quick as he was. And Austin Cindric, well, I think he's a solid driver. He wasn't great in 2023 for a lot of that year. And while Cindric showed improvement near the end of the year, getting a top 5 this past weekend at Martinsville, I still don't rate him as highly as a driver, though he's starting to kind of prove himself a little bit more. But I think Jerry Bullins and Brad working together, I think it will be a much better pairing. And I actually am a little more confident that Brad could get not only 1 win next year, but multiple wins as he is starting to get a little bit closer toward the end of his career in NASCAR. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with what officially ends up happening, but it does sound very likely at this point that Matt McCall will be going to Spire, and it sounds very likely that Brad will have a new crew chief, and it sounds that it will be Jeremy Bullins for the 2025 season. We'll have to wait and see what happens, though. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about AJ Allmendinger. Now, Dale Jr. yesterday, I believe on the Dale Jr. re-download or the download episode, Dale Jr. had all 4 drivers that will be competing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series Championship race tomorrow. AJ Allmendinger, of course, Justin Allgaier, of course, Cole Custer, and Austin Hill. And while Dale Jr., I think, was talking to either Austin Hill or Justin Allgaier, AJ Allmendinger said something very, very interesting. We're not even sure if he was truly joking or not. But he says he has a contract with Kaulig Racing potentially through 2034. AJ Allmendinger's been with Kaulig Racing since 2018 or 2019. So he's been with them for the last 5 years. And AJ's had a lot of success with Kaulig Racing. If it's true that he has a contract through 2034, whether that's in the Cup or the Xfinity Series, this means that AJ Allmendinger at the end of 2034 will be 52 years old. Now, we don't even know if Kaulig Racing is going to be around that long. We know, of course, they'll be in Cup once again in 2025, and they're probably going to be around in 2026. But the question is, how long is Kaulig Racing going to be around? Because we know Kaulig Racing has struggled definitely this year in the Xfinity Series and the Cup Series. SVG's gotten a couple good runs with Kaulig Racing, and he could have won a few races, but that, of course, is prepared by Trackhouse Racing. And then, of course, you have had AJ's had a couple strong runs with them, but he hasn't set the world on fire in Cup this year, and the other drivers in the 16 and 31 car haven't really gelled. Now, with their Xfinity program, they've been better. AJ, like I said, made the championship 4 this year. And then, of course, Shane Van Gisbergen got 3 victories, and AJ got 1 win. But outside of that, we haven't seen any other Kaulig driver just come in and do a fantastic job. Josh Williams has been a mess this year out on the racetrack. And then Daniel Dye's had a couple good performances, but he hasn't set the world on fire either this year. But I think one thing that could help them is, one, they are working with RCR a lot closer. There's pretty much a merger going on between RCR and Kaulig Racing. And number 2, bringing Ty Norris in. That's huge for the organization. That's going to be more cash coming in. And Ty Norris is someone that can really build programs up. I remember when this team was hyped up. Many people thought they were going to be on the same level as a team like 2311 and, of course, Trackhouse Racing and even RFK. And I remember a few years ago when they were great and they just have been struggling. I think that AJ, though, being with this team is really helped their program, and I do think he'll be there for a long time. But I did not think he had a contract through 2034. That is absolutely nuts, because I don't think anyone in the Cup Series right now has a contract even that long. I think the longest I know for sure is Chase Elliott, whose contract is through 2027. And granted, Ty Gibbs has a lifetime contract with JGR, but he probably has to go through all the contract extensions, stuff like Austin Cindric has to go through. So I think AJ being with Kaulig for as long as he is, I have to think he's at some point going to take an ownership stake, right? He's been with the team for the last couple of years, and I think that he will eventually get ownership into the program to try to make it better. So we'll see what happens there, how long he truly ends up being there. But if he's truly there for as long as he's saying, that is absolutely wild and absolutely crazy. But it wouldn't also surprise me or shock me if he's there and for as long as he says, because AJ's been with them for a very, very long time, and they've helped him a lot throughout his career over the course of the last 5 years. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Hill. As it was confirmed earlier today, during Championship Media Day, Austin Hill has confirmed that he will be returning to Richard Childress Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025, driving a number 21 car once again. Now, sponsorship was not confirmed today, but he also did confirm that he does have an option year for 2026. Now, originally, Austin Hill had signed a multi-year contract extension with RCR last year. There was talk about him going to Kaulig Racing for 2024. Obviously, that did not end up happening, and he stuck around with RCR in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Austin Hill this year has a really good chance and opportunity to win his first ever championship. And he's been one of the best super speed racers in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He's basically the new Dale Jr. He has won 3 super speed races this year, and basically all but 3 or 4 of his true Xfinity Series wins have come on super speedways. And he's also been really solid with RCR. Say what you want to say about Austin Hill and talk about him complaining and all that kind of stuff. I don't think Austin Hill's a bad driver. He's been a solid driver in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and he's someone that you can rely on, especially one, bringing sponsorship to the table, but number two, he's someone that you can absolutely rely on being a contender at a lot of other races. He's been fast at times on short tracks. He's been solid at intermediates, though this year their package hasn't been as good. But I think Austin Hill's a driver that you can rely on to at least get you a win or two every single year. Now, what are my realistic expectations for Austin Hill going into 2025? The goal is to make the championship 4. He needs to do what he did this year. And he needs to win more than 2 races. And I want to see him a little more consistently win on non-super speedway tracks. I know he's good at super speedways. I don't think there's any denying that. But I think for him to become a driver that can take that next step going forward, we need to see him take that step by winning some more ovals like a Homestead. Do what he did at Homestead Miami Speedway. That would be impressive. And I think getting at least 2 wins should be the goal for Austin Hill next year. The other question is, how long is he going to stay in the Xfinity Series? Because he does have that option here for 2026, so he could go back to Xfinity in 2026. But what about going to Cup? Kyle Busch only has a contract right now with RCR through 2025, and Kyle Busch's future, there's been a lot of rumors, people saying he won't be back after 2025. We could see Kyle go to Spire in 2026, so we'll see there. Could he go to the number 8 car? That could be a possibility. And what about Austin Dillon? Austin Dillon will be 35 at the end of next year, and Austin Dillon is starting to get a little bit older as well. So I'd have to think that there is a good chance that Austin Dillon could potentially retire in the not-so-distant future and go to more of an executive role. So that could lead, for the future, lead to Austin Hill going to Cup in some way. I think RCR will eventually want to move him up because they're probably going to lose some sponsors if Kyle Busch doesn't come back after 2025. But he's also made some select Cup starts, and I do imagine that he will make a couple Cup starts next year. There's been rumors that they could have ran a 3rd full-time car for Noah Gragson next year. That's obviously not the case at this time. But the other thing you got to think about, too, the Xfinity field is going to be very competitive next year. You're going to have a lot of really good rookies. Connor Zilic in the 80A car. You've got Carson Quaffle coming in driving the number 1 car next year. You've got Christian Eckes driving the 16. He's got his teammate Jesse Love to worry about. Harrison Burns is coming back down to Xfinity. Chandler Smith will probably not be back with Joe Gibbs Racing next year, but you've got Sam Mayer and Sheldon Creed at the Haas factory team next year. You're going to have a lot of great talent in this series in 2025, and I think you look at, and maybe Eric Almirola too coming back in some way, probably not Haley Deegan though, but you're probably going to see that happen where Austin Hill gets a chance and opportunity to do really solid next year. He's going to be one of the favorites on super speedways. There's no denying that. I hope he can do a really good job. We'll see how Austin Hill ends up doing, and we'll see if he can bring the pace and speed and be a contender. We'll see what he ends up doing and see where he performs. I do think he will for sure win at least 1 or 2 races at least in 2024 and be a championship threat and contender. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim. Now, I did a video discussing this earlier today on the channel, but it was confirmed early this morning that Corey Heim will be returning to TRICON Garage in 2025 for the 3rd year in a row, driving a number 11 truck once again with Safe Flight Auto as a majority sponsor for next year. We don't know who's crew chief at this time, but it does sound like Scott Cipodelli, who's been the crew chief for the last 2 years, will once again be the crew chief for Corey Heim in 2025. Everybody knows that Corey Heim is one of the best prospects in the lower series, and people have been wanting Corey Heim to move up. Now, obviously, what this tells me, of course, is with 2311, we don't know the future at this time. There have been some talk also about him going to Legacy. This tells me John Hunter will probably, of course, be sticking around next year with Legacy. But going back to Corey Heim, he is going to be the favorite for the championship next year because he's not going to have as much competition that he had this year. He's not going to have Christian Eckes, who's the favorite to win the championship this year, though Corey Heim was the fastest in truck practice, but Christian Eckes has been super, super strong at these shorter ovals throughout the whole entire season. And then, of course, you do have Nick Sanchez, who's been another championship contender. He's moving up next year to the NASCAR Xfinity Series of Big Machine Racing, replacing Park Clearman, who's retiring from full-time racing. You then also, of course, are going to have drivers like Daniel Dye and Taylor Gray, who both made the playoffs. Now, granted, he will have some competition for next year. Roger Carruth, of course, will be back in the Truck Series. He might have Daniel Hammer going over to McAnally Hilgeman, and there's some other drivers like Lane Riggs who's shown out, and Caden Honeycutt, who has also shown out as well. But what's really disappointing about Corey Heim not moving up is the fact that Cory, like I said, is a driver who has so much potential, and I think he's ready to make the jump up the Cup. The problem is that Toyota is super, super young right now. They've got a super, super young development pipeline at the moment and a lot of young drivers. That's the issue for Chandler Smith. And Chandler Smith, unlike drivers like Taylor Gray and William Sauvage, Chandler's doesn't bring as much funding. That's the same issue Eric Almirola is having and Ryan Truex is having. There's just too much buildup in the Cup Series right now there. You think about 23-11. If they do get a third car for next year, Riley Herbst is taken to see and not Corey Heim. Not based on talent, but based on money. Riley Herbst has a lot of money, and his family owns a lot of gas station chains with the Terribles Herbst brand. And then, of course, you have Bubba Wallace, who just signed a multi-year contract extension. He's not going anywhere. And Tyler Reddick, depending on what happens with the court case, he's sticking around 23-11. And Reddick has got a chance to win the championship this weekend. So he's not going anywhere. And then you think about legacy. Eric Jones, John Hunter, two of the best drivers that were rated in the lower series, and two drivers who are pretty good. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon, even though John Hunter could be a free agent at the end of next year. And then you got Joe Gibbs Racing. They're bringing Chase Briscoe into the 19 car, and Chase Briscoe is an absolute great talent. He's gotten 2 Cup wins, including a Southern 500 victory. Though Denny Hamlin could retire in the future, I don't think he's going to ever go to Joe Gibbs Racing because of the situation over there between Ty and Cory. And while Cory kind of denied those rumors about that, I don't think a lot of people at Joe Gibbs Racing were happy with Cory and how they race against Ty. They don't really like each other. It's no secret. So, my question is, how long is Cory going to stay in the Truck Series before moving up? Because I think Sam Hunt Racing will give him a lot of starts next year. That's who he will probably end up driving for. And will he make Cup starts? Well, I think 2025 could be the last year he's full-time in trucks, because I think that a lot of people, especially 20-11, really want to get him up the Cup. It's no secret that people think he's extremely talented. I think Connor Zilic is the only driver who, in my opinion, is a better prospect than Corey Heim. But it's a shame to see best Toyota prospect out there not getting the chance and opportunity to move up because of politics. I think it's disappointing for sure, because I do really think he's deserving of moving up next year. And it's a shame to see he's not going up while you have drivers like Taylor Gray moving up who haven't won in the NASCAR Truck Series, or guys like Daniel Dye moving up who haven't won in the Truck Series at this point. To me, I think that it needs to happen sooner rather than later that he gets the chance and opportunity to move up. But I think, again, it all comes down to funding and sponsorship. He will have competition in certain areas. Ty Majeski will be back next year, most likely. Grant Enfinger's already confirmed for 2025. It will be in a contract year next year, though, with, of course, the CR7 Motorsports team that he'll probably stick around for quite some time. But I think for Corey Heim, he's going to be the guy to beat. I think he's going to win at least 6 or 7 races next year. And I do think that Corey Heim will be the leader and the guy to beat, though he will have competition, like I already said. I do believe that he will be a guy that will be the favorite to win the championship. If he doesn't get it done this weekend and get his first title, I think he's going to be absolutely the guy that can do it for sure. So I think he will win at least 5 or 6 races. I think he for sure makes the championship 4. I also think he will win the regular season championship. I think that's a no-brainer too. I think he will in fact be your regular season champion in 2025. I think Corey's that good of a driver. I think he needs moving up. I hope it happens soon, but I'm also not shocked or stunned or surprised to see him sticking back in trucks, because there's really not a lot of place to go for him, unfortunately, at this point because of politics when it comes to sport. So I'm not surprised or shocked to see him getting held up in trucks once again, but I think he should be personally moving up, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Trackhouse Racing. Now today was the appeal for all the organizations and teams that got in trouble for the race manipulation. Trackhouse Racing and the 1 organization, the 3 team for Austin Dillon, and 2311 and the 23 team had all basically were originally going to appeal. Now, Trackhouse Racing would be the only organization that actually went through their appeal, and it was confirmed early this evening around 5 Central Standard Time or 6 Central Standard Time that Trackhouse Racing has lost their appeal for the race manipulation that took place at Martinsville. Now, RCR and, of course, 2311 had both tried to appeal as well, but yesterday it was confirmed that 2311 would not be appealing it. They said while they did not agree with the penalties they received from what happened in Martinsville, they decided to move on and focus on the championship. Obviously, they've got a lot of things going on with the lawsuit currently at the moment, and also, of course, focusing on trying to make sure they can focus on Tyler Reddick and see if he can get his first ever Cup Series championship, and basically in only his second year with the organization and team. And then it was confirmed that RCR, not only were they basically dropped their appeal, but basically they got denied the opportunity to appeal because of what happened the last time they tried to appeal, when Austin Dillon intentionally rushed the driver in front of them to win a race, and Austin Dillon was very lucky to not even lose the win overall. But for Trackhouse Racing, they did release a statement. They are not planning to appeal anymore going forward, and they do plan to move on from this and focus on the championship. So this is probably the last time, at least unless some stuff comes out this weekend, they're probably going to be talking about this story. Let's go back and discuss everything. So basically, all three of these teams were caught for race manipulation. Basically, on the radio, you had Christopher Bell getting helped by Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace radioed down 10 laps to go that he had a flat tire, was backing up very, very slowly. What I have to think is, even though they might have had a flat tire, something going wrong, they really never found any evidence on the car, which is why NASCAR basically penalized them. Had they found something wrong with the car, they probably would not have penalized Bubba Wallace or the 23 team. So that's why you're going to see Eric Phillips as a crew chief, and you're going to see TJ Bell as a spotter for the team this weekend. Moving on to the 3 team, basically saying, do you know the deal? That absolutely tells me everything I need to know that they were doing race manipulation, and NASCAR cracked down on them. I thought they would get a bigger penalty than they did. And then, of course, the 1 team, they were probably the most discreet of the 3 that got affected, but obviously they got in trouble for it. Now, SVG's team, the 16 team, was not affected by any sort of penalties, and Christopher Bell, while he could have gotten a penalty for race manipulation, they basically looked at what he did with the wall ride he did, which some are saying is questionable, but regardless of it is still a wall ride, they basically had to do this, where they had to penalize a bunch of people. And I do think in a lot of ways NASCAR did get this call right, but I also do worry that we are going to see stuff like this happen again. Now, NASCAR did say earlier this week multiple times, they did explain that they are potentially going to start handing out race suspensions for drivers that get involved in race manipulation. They are planning to look at the rule book perhaps and basically find a way to stop the manufacturers from doing this, and we don't know at this time. They've already had that competition meeting, but I do think that NASCAR needs to find a way to stop the race manipulation. But one way that I think would absolutely end a lot of this race manipulation is something already discussed today, is the playoff format. The playoff format creates a lot of this nonsense. And while we saw sometimes in the Winston Cup era, in the full season format, we did see sometimes where basically they would affect the outcome by bringing extra cars there. That was very, very rare in special occasions. But you know what's remembered? Some of the greatest seasons. 1992, one of the best seasons of all time, because you had 5 or 6 drivers that mathematically could have won the championship that year. Another year that's loved is 1979, a year that it came down to 2 drivers, Darrell Waltrip and Richard Petty. One of the best seasons for a lot of people in NASCAR history. And I think that you look back at things that need to change, and people also love 2011. While that was a playoff system, 2011 had no race manipulation going on at the time, and he had 2 of the best drivers in their era performing at great abilities. Tony Stewart went on to win 5 races, and Carl, while he didn't win, was super, super consistent. It came down to a tie, and it's one of the best seasons in recent years. I think with all this playoffs and gimmicks and all that stuff, I think that if you get rid of a lot of the playoff gimmicks that have been going on, I think that will end a lot of the nonsense that has been going on, and I think that's where we need to start looking at. I think NASCAR needs to be harsher going forward. If this happens again, which I think there's a very good chance and strong possibility that we are going to see some sort of race manipulation at some point in the future, probably within the next couple of years, maybe as early as next year. We don't know at this point. We're probably not going to see that this weekend for the championship race, because NASCAR is probably going to tell people no funny business, but I do think that there is going to be some stuff that is going to happen, and I think that there could be some changes going forward for sure that fixes it. I think that penalizing the manufacturers might be the easiest solution, but you also have to be very careful with the manufacturers. You really have to toe the company line and be super, super careful. Otherwise, if you mess with the manufacturers, you do get in trouble. This basically is a very similar penalty to what happened with Cole Custer in 2022, helping Chase Briscoe out, and basically the flat tire and communication and all that stuff. I am really hoping that we can find a way to stop race manipulation. That's been one of the things I want to see happen, and I really hope NASCAR can take the step forward and begin ending it. I think it will happen again, though, at some point. I don't think the penalty was harsh enough, but I'm glad to see the Trackhouse lost their appeal, and the other 2 teams, they were smart enough to not continue it on and focus on getting the season over, and I'm glad to see that they're basically were able to uphold. They weren't going to win the appeal to begin with. I'm glad to see that NASCAR basically set the hammer down, and the independent appeal decided to make the right decision. Glad to see they did that. to be honest with you. I think it's the right call and right decision that they made today. So, that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. You think that Trackhouse Racing basically deserved the penalties they got? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts, of course, on Cory Heim returning the TRICON? Do you think he should have moved up next year? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If we get the announcement on the injunction being granted or not, we'll discuss it here live today on the channel. If not, the next time you see me, either will be doing reactions to qualifying for the Craftsman Truck Series, or, of course, we will be doing reactions to the championship race as well. Got a lot of great content dropping this weekend that I can't wait for you guys to check out. See a Shane Van Gisbergen video after the Xfinity race at Phoenix. We'll see all that content dropping this week, and this, of course, is the final season week of the year, which I'm really excited to get this year finished and done. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.